Today in the chat trap, we have Mr. Vivek Gupta, a design practitioner and a renowned architect with years of extensive experience in urban planning, architecture, and interior designing. With overall 30 years of rich experience, he and his team, Arvind and Vivek Associates, enjoying the patronage of some of the most esteemed design projects and clientele, not only across in Delhi, but also globally. Warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Mac.
How are you feeling today?
Very good, on top of the world.
So, of course, sir, my first question will be, we would love to know about your 30 years of journey. Where did it start? Because everybody had their own fond memories of their first project. So we would love to know about that.
Well, let me correct you. It's not 30 years. It's been 36 years now.
Wow.
So with that 36 years, in the hindsight, I think amnesia takes over because it's been such a hard struggle, to be honest.
I'm sure.
I don't think there has been first project as such. There could have been first task given to me because project came very late in life, after a few years of struggle. Very vaguely remember, I think the first thing that I started the studio was a room in a home of somebody that I knew and not even a separate entry. And to set up the studio, what we did was that we went to the market and I bought a 20 feet long MS pipe, conduit pipe, got it welded into a stand, bought an 8 by 4 feet board, commercial board, and cut it into two, and that was my drawing board. And those were the good old days when we used to use a set square and T-square and parallel bar. And with my own equipment, set up the office. And for next 6 months, I think I was working on a competition. So there was no project, but I was working on a competition. That was the housing project for Sarita Vihar in Delhi.
So residential.
Residential. But that was not a project. That was a competition entry that we were doing.
All right.
And so 6 months I was doing just that, nothing else. There was no project. There was no money coming in. And then there was a project. Then somebody wanted us to do a layout for some flatted factories in Delhi. And well, if you were to call that a project, yeah, that was my first project.
Wonderful. 36 years.
Yeah, that's been a long
quite
time.
long journey.
Yes, absolutely.
So, sir, what is your design philosophy? Because I've heard you in a lot of videos, you mentioning about C-Cube. So if you can explain this to our audience.
Well, all the architects, all our creativity is based, unlike an artist, unlike a sculptor, is based on a client, Unless I have a client, I have a project, I have no creativity. There is, an architect cannot design and build on his own. So you need a client. So I think when I talk about the 3 C's, the first and the most important C of that 3 C is the client. So for an architect, client is literally the person, the God, because of whom we have the project.
Of course, yes.
And then working in India, which is diverse climate from the cold and dry climate in Leh, Ladakh to the very, very cold and other wet
everything
climate.
in extreme.
Yeah, extreme climates. So I think designing in various parts of the country, it becomes very important to take into consideration the climate that you are designing in. So the second C for me is the climate, and I like to design a climatically responsive building. In fact, we are one of the leading practices in the country on climatically responsive design. And the third C, because we work on various different genre of work, is the context. Right. What is the context of the project? What is the setting of the project? What is the demand of the client? What typology is that project? So the context comes into picture. So I always talk about the 3 C's or C-Cube as you call it, which is about the client, climate and the context.
Wonderful. So now I would like you to speak on diversity of project typology that you do, such as from large-scale townships to IT parks, then institutional buildings, hotels, corporates, and residential.
Well, an architect doesn't need to the best of my knowledge, get typified and start mastering one kind of architecture, one kind of building typology.
Right.
Because that gets very, very boring.
Monotonous,
so,
right?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is that you should be able to design a project that is given to you, because at the end of the day, barring a little bit of typical things that a project could have, more often than not, if you are talking about spatial planning and everything, it remains the same. doing diverse projects has given me the ability to kind of keep fresh ideas coming every time. It's very different to do a master planning where you are basically doing a volumetric studies, you are doing kind of road systems and kind of urban infrastructure into picture, to an IT park where 24/7 working, which is important. So you need to take into consideration a building which is going to work 24/7,
Right.
is going to have a certain timing, will have issues of security, will issues have of data and everything. To housing, which is about people, which is about the social interaction of those people, to institutional buildings when we design universities and schools, which is again very, very typical, but then it allows you a functional freedom. It allows you freedom of the form of the building. And then the retail interiors and the office fit outs that we tend to do gives me a lot of freedom to keep my mind afresh, keep the ideas flowing, and you don't get bored of the kind of work that you do.
Right. All right. So I saw a lot of your videos wherein you were mentioning about your idea on build to suit. So we would love to know, and I'm sure our viewers would love to know your idea on build of suit.
So, build to suit is a concept which is basically where an architect is not enforcing any of his particular ideas or
Right.
concepts.
All right.
Every project needs to be built to suit, as I said, the client and the climate and the context. So I will again have to come back to the 3 C's or the C cube that I speak about. So when I say build to suit architecture or build to suit interior, it is to build to suit the project that you are building in. Each project is very, very unique.
I'm sure.
Each project has to convey a certain aspiration of a client, a certain aspiration of that project demand. And as an architect, it is our duty to ensure that we are delivering and building to suit that particular project and that particular client. And that I think will remain as the main focus on build to suit kind of architecture. It also allows me to rethink every time a project is coming. So it's not that a project typology, supposing we are doing schools or something like that, that every time because the context is the same or the typology is the same, so the design is going to be visited again and again, and we need to ensure that that the project is built to suit to that particular environment, to that particular client, to that particular typology.
Right. Now, we've also heard you talking about sustainability, like material techniques used in buildings. So how it helps environment space in probably longer run?
Sustainability is the biggest buzzword today. As you would know, everybody talks about sustainability in architecture. To me, sustainability is not a philosophy, it's a way of life.
Way of life.
Building construction and building remains the largest plunderer of resources in the world. We are taking every single material that goes into building construction out of this environment. And unless we preserve the environment, unless we are careful about using the resource that is coming out of the earth, we are depleting the natural resource that's coming out of this earth. And we are destroying in a manner something or the other, whether it is the environment or the ecology or just the resource. So sustainability has to be in the DNA of every architect, I feel. What I also feel is that sustainability is not a mechanical equation where you get points because of your rating for IGBC or GREHA or whatever, but a way of design. Every design has to have sustainability of material, of resource optimization, of energy consumption in its DNA. And to me, sustainability is the only way that we should build. There is no other way that I know of, at least.
So I'm really looking forward to know the answer for my next question, because you mentioned once, make your passion your paycheck. And there are many youngsters out there, who would like you to probably elaborate how to make their passion into paycheck.
Is there any doubt, Mehak, in that? I think the best thing is to
Absolutely.
be effortless in whatever you're doing
And love what you do.
and always love what you
Always
do.
love.
And architecture, somehow or the other, because just imagine every day is different. There is no drudgery at all.
Certainly.
When you love your work, every morning you wake up with fresh ideas,
Absolutely.
fresh tasks to do, fresh project to work on. Not only that, even more often than not, fresh clients to work with. So there is a forever changing scenario at work. Also, despite the fact that we are very lucky that in the studio we've had a long continuation and association of people who worked with us. And I don't even say that people, it's the association that I have with people. But then you keep getting fresh faces, you keep getting fresh interns, you get fresh intake. There is a forever changing dynamism that every architectural studio has.
Right.
I do not know of how many other professions allow you that. I mean, you can say that a dentist has a new patient on the chair every day.
Every day,
But then
yeah.
his interaction is so minimal. And in fact, if I was to say with pun intended, that he doesn't even have a dialogue with his patient because the patient is on the chair. But an architect, in fact, becomes like a family during the project. The project is the baby, you know.
Especially the residential ones.
And even otherwise, you see,
the other
what happens is that our involvement in a project, our emotional attachment to every project that we're doing is so huge that, you know, it's like having a baby. You know, you go
Right.
through all the pains and the joys and pains and tribulations and the trial, everything that goes through every project keeps the passion going. And when you can make, as you said, passion your paycheck,
Your paycheck.
there's nothing better than that. And I do not know whether this passion always turns into a good paycheck or no, because architects more often than not are not even paid very well. And more often than not, also the last payments are always an issue. That's where you are actually finishing a project. But keeping the rant aside, I think any profession which allows you your passion to become your paycheck, there is nothing better
There's
than that.
nothing
If you are a rally driver and you can get money out of driving, which is your passion, I think it's like that. An architect is known and supposed to do creative work, and if that creative work
Turns out to
can
be their
make you
paycheck.
earn money, yes,
Nothing
absolutely.
is better
Yes,
than
yes,
that.
yes.
Absolutely. So, sir, Jack of all trades, master of none is a universal tagline which almost everyone follows. But I think you always prefer opposite of it, something like that. We would love to know that idea or that, you know, what is that?
Meg, you know, loud mouth, but doesn't matter, you know. I always say you need to do whatever you need to do with 100% attempt, and you need to perfect whatever you're doing. So it's not about being a jack of all trades and master of none. I would say you need to be jack of all trades and also master each of the trade that you want to indulge in. So, you know, for me, besides architecture, whatever I want to do, whether it is running or off-roading or birding or trekking, I would like to do it to the best of my abilities. You know, I'm an extremely competitive character. You know, I would like to do everything. If you can do it, I should be able to do it. But the philosophy is that it's not as if I don't want you to win. I want you to do better than what you do, but I want to do better than you. So there is a competitive spirit always.
So you believe the opposite to it?
Not exactly. So I said it's very competitive, but at the same time, it's not at the cost of you not doing well. I want you to do well. If you've been like, you know, I'll give you an example of running. You know, there was this friend of mine who was 10 years younger when I started running, and he and I were almost the same speed, or we used to run in the same timing. So when I was doing my first half marathon for ADHM, his timing was around 240 or something, and he was aiming at 230. And you know, when we started that race, I wanted him to do 230, you know, because so that he fulfills his dream. But I wanted to finish in 228 because I
Okay.
wanted to do better than him. So not at the cost of his that he should do it in 245 and I do 240, so I do better. Let him fulfill his dream, but I need to be competitive. I need to do better than him. So it's like doing that. You need to, but at the same time, it's not. As I always say, life is not cherry pickings, you know. You need to put in hard yards in everything that you do, be it work, be it running, be it architecture,
Hobbies,
everything
everything.
you need to give your 100% and know that there are no shortcuts to success. Uh, Life is not a low hanging fruit.
Absolutely.
You need to really work
hard
to
and work
achieve
towards it.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, there's so much of learning I'm getting in
Come
today's
on.
interview. All right. So, sir, talking about the current scenario, there was sudden pandemic and then it's still going. People went through it. It's still continuing. So, according to you, what do you think how it helped people? Like if I talk about a positive aspect, how it helped people in a positive way?
Did it help people? In fact, I don't know,
So, leaving all the negative asides and probably focusing on the positive. So, according to you, what do you think? Like, it helped people in a certain way, or maybe blessings in disguise kind of a thing. Any
Well, the
thoughts?
kind of person that I am, I don't think there's been any blessing in disguise for me. I'll be very honest. In fact, it's been because I'm not the one who subscribes to slow life. Yes, it is good for the people who were caught in as you asked me, when work was my passion and the passion is my paycheck. So I have never found it to be drudgery. I've enjoyed every single day of going to the studio, meeting the clients, going on the site, and that's what I've thrived on. In fact, the slow life has killed me. I'll be very honest. It's not the kind of life that I aspire for. It's not the kind of life that I'd ever dreamt of. It sets you back because it actually, the only thing that perhaps it will do is to make you think again about the ephemeral nature of life, and which we had started taking for granted. If you think, I don't think it could be at best considered as a positive takeaway, that it's a realization that life is ephemeral. What you need to do is make every second count, make every moment of your life count, which is what again brings me to the same thing, that if you're enjoying your work, then you are doing all of that, you have other passions, just not working, you are doing other things which make you a jack of all trades or something like that.
Yes.
That is the thing that if you are doing, you are living your life fully, and then you will have no regrets. The regret is that in the pandemic, when we were all locked up in the homes,
Without work.
it was heart-wrenching to see, at least in our line of work, when the construction workers who we are supposed to take care because they are our hands, they are our tools,
I'm sure.
which we do not. We suddenly woke up and everybody was wanting to do some kind of charity. And I'd been sticking my neck out and saying that charity is not empowerment. It's taking away your own guilt, that suddenly you wake up and say, oh, the plight of the construction workers, and you want to give them some kind of
of course,
that's not the idea.
Right.
Empowerment of construction worker is what we as architects and construction people need to do. What we needed to do is that ensure that on all our sites, when there are going to be families, that there is proper hutment, there is proper toilets. If there are small children who are on the site, you need to ensure that there is a creche for them. There is the government's provision of ESI and PF are taken care of, so that God forbid if there's another pandemic or another situation where the construction workers are going to be without work, we do not suddenly start pulling and start feeling superior by doing charity for them or by collecting money for them and taking away our guilt.
So, sir, what are your views on placemaking in public spaces?
I think the most important aspect of public space is how you make that relevant. India has a lot of public place. Everything outside your home is literally public space. We are a democratic setup. So everybody owns a space which is outside, which is not owned by a government or anything like that. So everything is a public space. Unfortunately, the most important part of public space is placemaking. That gives you the mooring, that gives you a focal point, that gives you the axis around which you can create an activity. I will give you an example, and I always talk about placemaking. Otherwise, some of the biggest plazas will remain windswept places, where there is, unfortunately in India, there could be cattle, there could be hawkers, there would be all kinds of people. How do you ensure that a public space has placemaking, which becomes relevant to people? It also affords you an opportunity to teach design.
Right.
You know, if I may use the word, that everybody from economically weaker section or have-nots, if I was to ever use that word, uh, have-nots from design perspective, who were not exposed to good design because they do not have that means in their own homes or in their own spaces. When they get out into public spaces, the first thing that we can do as architects and designers is do a good public space design so that people do get exposed to what good design is.
Right.
In a way, it teaches the ability to grasp without formal education what good design is. I will give you an example. A good, well designed bench, just the fact that it is ergonomically designed, it gives you comfort, it's rightly contoured, it's got the right height, will make a person who's not having a good designed bench or a seating space in his own home, when he sits on that, he will realize somewhere subconsciously that this was good design or this was a good ergonomics, and this made me feel comfortable. Whenever he can afford, he would want, at least as there is a yardstick, there has been a standard that he would want to have a similar kind of a system where he can get that comfort. A well-designed bus stand gives you that sense of aesthetics. It gives you that sense of enclosure where you felt good about it. Yeah, there was a handrail when the bus came. There was a strip which was a tactile strip so that you can find direction and everything. I always give an example of one of the most chaotic junctions in Delhi. The AIMS roundabout. It is one of the most chaotic junctions.
Right.
The traffic is the fastest moving
Absolutely
traffic over there.
jam-packed, yes.
There are 4 flyovers around there, and normally the underside of a flyover or the underbelly of a flyover is supposed to be a very negative space and prone to all kinds of criminal elements and antisocial elements. In this particular case, all that has happened is that there is a contoured lawn which is there as a public space. But then I think the government or the Jindal stainless steel people put some mushrooms. Those are stainless steel mushrooms. There's controversial mushrooms. Some people don't like it. As architects, we have an opinion on everything that is designed.
Right.
Some architects don't like it, some like it. But for me, because I've experienced that when you are in that space, it's so much of chaos all around. There's traffic, there is cacophony of sound,
Right.
visual cacophony. There are lots and lots of people. And then the worst case scenario, there are 2 large hospitals around there, the AIMS hospital and Safdarjung hospital. And people come there more often than not from outside the city. They feel very lost. And then there is the emotionally traumatized people who've come to the AIMS and Safdarjung hospitals, and they actually feel very lost in the city. The underbelly, the underside of those flyovers, that little island that has been created over there, the way that placemaking, because of those mushrooms, and now there's a water body being created, it has worked so well for those people because they are traumatized emotionally, physically, not slept for days together and everything. When they come to that space, it is so soothing for them. They feel emotionally connected. In that entire cacophony, they feel that space as a meditative space. They find emotional succor in that. And I've seen hundreds of people finding rest and sleep in that space where all around there is so much. So that is a placemaking which is for people actually.
Wow.
Placemaking in public spaces is very, very important.
Very important.
Because otherwise, a public space, as I said, could be just a windswept plaza. It could be a very large open space
Right.
without any articulation. What these placemaking things will do is they will give articulation to that public space. And I think that is an extremely important aspect.
Absolutely.
We need to ensure that not only that a public space is thriving, the public space also needs to attract convivial atmosphere. Some of the biggest public spaces in the world, say for instance Trafalgar Square, it's not a very large space, but it's got a placemaking. You know,
Placemaking,
that
yes.
monument in the center, the pigeons and everything. There are hundreds and thousands of people, lakhs of people visit every month.
Right.
And because it's a convivial space, somehow it is a happy space. And that is what every public space needs to do. In India, we are short on public spaces which thrive. India Gate is a great example of public space. People go there, but there is no placemaking there. There is absolutely no placemaking which is there. I'm glad that in the given new development of Central Vista, we are talking about placemaking, that there is going to be placemaking that will ensure that there is certain articulation to that entire beautiful space. A kiosk is not really the idea, but we've made in India chaotic spaces, chaotic public gatherings as placemaking or as public spaces. Even Kumbh Mela happens in a public space, but is that the kind of public space that you want? I think you would want a slightly more articulated public space where there is facility for that kind of gathering.
Yes.
There is a relevant public facilities which are there, right from water to toilets to resting spaces to greenery to shade to proper footpaths to proper grounds. I think this is the most important aspect.
Absolutely. And it's very important, as you said. So almost everyone talking about smart cities, green buildings, less of carbon footprints. So what proactive approach that one should keep in mind to actually build energy efficient space?
Smart city is again the other new buzzword besides sustainability. You know, we have to understand what is a smart city. The city doesn't become smart like that. You know, the smart city concept is basically about bona fide people. It's about bona fide services. It's about bona fide facilities. So I will start what is a smart city. First, what we need to do in a smart city is that we need to have numbers, or we need to have census that in a city of Gurgaon, there are 30 lakh people. Each of those 30 lakh people are at least bona fide, so that the municipality or the city people know that how many people live in this city.
Yeah, right.
So everybody needs to register themselves as a proper bona fide citizen. Thereafter, there is a survey that is carried out which will talk about that if we need to provide water for 30 lakh people, we need certain quantity of water.
Right.
If we need to provide for transport for so many people, if we need to provide for electricity for so many people. After that, the question comes of metered water, metered electricity, because 80% of water is non-metered. 80% of the electricity is through hooked wire. People don't pay for it. So the demand and the supply will never be the same.
Right.
Will never be at par, because the demand is unauthorized demand, because we do not know who's suddenly tapping out water from without any meter.
Right.
And stuff like that. So what we need to ensure is, foremost, we need to have a census where everybody is a bona fide resident of that city.
Right.
Then the city municipality has to ensure that if we have to provide them water, electricity, road, home, we at least have the numbers, and then we plan for those. Thereafter, a smart city by concept is where the minimum carbon footprint is there. And for that, what we need to do is that have smart commute. People do not have to commute long distances. That means you can, as far as possible, walk to work, have all the facilities like schools, hospitals, and everything that you need to touch on daily basis are within walking distance or within a short distance, so that people do not waste their time in commute. There is less pollution, there is less time wastage, and you can utilize your time in more gainful activities, more meaningful activities. And the last mile connectivity is there.
So when we say smart cities, building automation, Internet of Things comes in mind. Your say on it?
It's a new thing, Internet of Things, but yes, it's the way of future. I'm not the most tech savvy guy, but all I can tell you is that when instead of your wife, I think that's a very gender specific thing, or the spouse starts talking to you about, uh, in times to come, Internet of Things will do most of the functions that you need to do manually. Because if your refrigerator is not having enough milk in the shelves, or it doesn't have fruit, or it doesn't have vegetable, there would be a scenario where, because of the IoT, it will tell you that the total quantity of milk left in the refrigerator is 2 liters, whereas you need 5 liters or 10 liters in this week. So it sends somewhere a message to your grocery store for that 8 liters of milk, and that milk will come to your house. It will get delivered. Before you reach your home, you're traveling back from work at 7 o'clock every day. You come at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. It turns off the lights, or it turns off your air conditioning, so that when you reach
Sensor
your
kind of thing.
yeah. So this is what basically Internet of Things will do and can do. It allows you functional. What word would that be? Functional efficiency. And it also allows you a smart way of living, where you do not need to basically work too hard towards making your life comfortable. So, well, yeah, there would be much more that is being possible through Internet of Things and smart cities. But right now, this is what I can think of. And I'm missing out on something else. I think then building automation is something which is like almost all of us are trying to use in the buildings that we are doing. If it's a residential building, people do want building automation for the lighting, for the music, for TVs, for air conditioning, for curtains. Of course, security is one of the most important things. Besides that, even for the offices that we're doing, building automation has started playing a very, very big role. In fact, for it allows you to keep the buildings very energy efficient. You set a temperature. It's like the climatronic control in your car, that you set it at 23 degrees. If it is 20 degrees, it'll hike up the air conditioning to 23 degrees. If it's 27 degrees outside, then it'll bring it lower to the 23 degrees. So this is one aspect. Lighting is another. When occupied areas, sensor-based lighting, when you are not occupying an area, the lighting can go off. When there are people, then you can get the lighting. So this is part of the building automation. I think extremely important, allows for greater energy efficiency in every aspect of life. And then Internet of Things, as I said, is also very important. Internet of Things will allow you to, in going forward, at least for offices and everything, before you reach the flexibility of desk spaces, which is that you don't have a designated space in your office. Before you reach your office, you have an app where you go and book your seat. So it will show you a map of the entire plan of the entire office. It'll show you these desks are available. You book your desk. When you go there, you take your laptop, you go and sit on that table and everything, and you can start functioning from there. So these are part of the Internet of Things which are coming into picture now, making working in an office, working at home more comfortable, more efficient. Yeah, more efficient, because certainly more efficient, because you don't have to struggle for this. Parking is another thing, which is smart parking, that before you reach your parking lot, you can see on your app that this is the parking slot which is available, so that you don't go around the parking space, and you can go and park your car at the designated spot. Automated parking, which is coming there, you can leave your car at the entrance and it will self-park itself. So these are some of the things which will make your life very, very easy, which will make your life efficient. And also you then can devote your time which you waste in finding parking, walking to work, or commuting in traffic, or then finding a desk to work on. All of that will become much, much easier. So I think it looks all hunky-dory in times to come.
Hopefully we want that very soon. So now we come to a very interesting part, which was not told to you.
Has it not been interesting so far?
According to me, I loved, this session, because there's so much of learning, there's so much of good content which you were giving, and I was thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm sure a lot of viewers are. So now it's going to be why interesting, because first of all, it's not told to you. It's going to be a rapid fire, but on more of on personal front.
Okay.
If you wish, you can choose one word. If you would like to explain in detail, you can. But I think it's one word only. Maybe it's going to be a one-word answer. Off-roading or tennis?
Tennis, off-roading any day.
Mountain or beaches?
Beaches,
Netflix or cinema?
cinema.
The most fun thing according to you which you did in the lockdown and you enjoyed doing it?
In the lockdown,
Yes.
I enjoyed gardening, certainly. You know, I was very lucky that in the lockdown,
Gardening, wow.
yes, we had a lovely terrace garden. We grew vegetables, and I think that was one of
So
the
do you
most therapeutic.
pick and cook?
Yes,
any of them?
absolutely, absolutely. So this is what I was doing through the lockdown. Luckily for us, when vegetables were sparse to come,
Which
gardening
is your favorite vegetable which you've grown?
So I was making do with whatever we had. So we were making soup with parsley and using garnish of whatever we were growing. Some of the vegetables were being used for soup, also for cooking, also for jam, also all of that. So that was fun, yeah.
So you prefer dressing up in formals or casuals? Which is
Always.
Wow.
Whether it's casuals or formal.
I know the answer of the next question, but still I'll be asking. Are you social or antisocial?
God, I would die if I was antisocial. I need people. I think that they are my energy.
Social
Absolutely.
person, vibrant, socially active. So which country now would you like, after the pandemic is over, which country would you like to travel? UK, Australia, or you would like to explore in India?
Well, I wish you gave me some other choices. So I think Europe is where I would anytime and all the time want to go. Yeah, I find it a little
Any
more.
particular place in Europe?
All places in Europe. I love Europe, you know, because it's culturally very rich, very vibrant, architecturally very rich. I think, yeah, and different countries, different culture. Really, I thrive on the Europe. Yeah.
Wonderful. You're a morning person or absolutely no morning person?
No morning. I used to be a morning person when I was running. So wake up at 5 every morning.
Wow, that's a crazy,
So morning,
amazing
you know, I sleep very little. So, well, the answer would be morning and night both. I am a day.
Balanced?
Yeah. No, not balanced. I wake up early in the morning and I don't like to. Sleeping is the last thing that I want.
Okay, all right. And how many hours of sleep do you
I
get?
think 4 hours is more than enough for me.
4
Yeah,
hours?
it's more than enough. Absolutely.
That's a creative mind. Okay, so I think it was an amazing, interesting session. Thank you
you,
so much for being with us in the chat trap. To proceed further, now I would like to invite Director A-Class Marble, Mr. Ramesh Bhandari. Thank you so much for joining us in. We hope that you will love this chat trap. On behalf of the entire team, me Mehak Dhawan signing off.